Switzerland is divided into states called cantons. The canton that runs across the northern and eastern shores of Lake Geneva is known as the Canton of Vaud. The general area is known as the Lake Geneva region, and it offers some of the best locations in Europe for a winter vacation. During the late 60s, I lived in this part of Switzerland and spent my vacations right here. The area has all the winter sports you'd expect and comfortable accommodations. What makes it special is that unlike many of Europe's winter resorts that are designed for the rich and famous, most of the towns in Vaud are set up for families or couples who are considering becoming families. Ah, the thrill of true love. Like a balloon, it lifts you to new heights. And the Lake Geneva region is a perfect spot for balloonists or people who just want to take an amazing ride. The microclimate in the town of Châteaudet creates ideal flight conditions and has made it a world center for ballooning. Each year during the last week of January, hot air balloonists from all over the world come to Châteaudet. Over 80 balloons from 15 different countries take part in a week of mountain ballooning, and 60,000 spectators come to watch. Hot air ballooning was introduced during the late 1700s by the Montgolfier brothers, who were responsible for the first flight with passengers. You couldn't actually call it a manned flight because the passengers were a rooster, a lamb, and a duck. I should say in all fairness that a year later, in 1783, they were responsible for the first flight that was manned. It was over Paris, it lasted 28 minutes, and there was a pilot and a passenger. Hot air balloons depend on the lifting power of hot air, which is lighter than cold air. Accordingly, ballooning in the cool winter air of the Swiss Alps has a particular advantage. Xavier Fiel is a licensed balloon pilot who takes part in the great balloon events, but he'll also take visitors up for a ride.
For the hot air balloon, when you burn inside the balloon, the hot air, it
expands.
Exactly, so like this you can fly. Only control I have, up, down. That's it. The speed and the direction I can't control. It's all the time the wind.
There is no propulsion system. A hot air balloon can't be steered. The pilot can control the height by dropping the weights attached to the balloon. He can add more hot air to increase the balloon's height, or let some of the air out, which will lower it. The direction of travel is controlled by locating and catching air currents heading in the direction you want to go. The longest balloon flight, both in terms of distance, 25,361 miles, and time, 20 days straight, began right here in Châteaudet. It's still the world record, and it's held by a local Swiss psychiatrist named Bertrand Piccard and his British co-pilot and balloon designer, Brian Jones. In 1999, they completed the first round-the-world flight. And because they were locked together for 480 hours, they also get credit for the first successful lighter-than-air psychoanalysis. The wind currents took us into some of the more remote valleys and above some of the more traditional chalets. Originally, the word chalet described a small dwelling used by sheep herders in the Alps of Switzerland, Bavaria, France, and Italy. Eventually, it was used to refer to any small house on the side of a mountain or in a mountainous region. Chalets are made from heavy planks of timber that are framed together like a log cabin. The side walls often extend past the corners, forming private sheltered porches. The balconies are detailed with carved railings. The windows are small and the shutters are decorated. The roofs are low and slanted to deal with the heavy snow they must support. The most traditional roofs are made from hand-cut wooden shingles. Olivier Veuve is one of the few master roofers in the world who practices this historic craft. He spends the winters preparing the wood and then cutting it by hand.
I'm making shingles. It's to put it on roofs in the chalet in the mountains or in towns. We have it in the forest. We don't need big factories to make it. We can do it ourselves. Protects from the snow. It's very elastic, but in the same time it's very solid. It keeps longer on the roof. new system can maybe it's okay for 20 years, while this one will be for 50 years. I got into this work because when I was very young, I kept the cows in the mountain, and I always wanted to do this job. When I see these beautiful roofs, and I ask many old people if they can teach me this work, and after a long time I found two old men who teach me. I like it because you work from the forest to the roof, you do everything yourself, and always be outside in the mountain, and it's nice.
All of this is surrounded by some of Europe's finest spots for winter sports. One of my favorites is Villars-Grillon. It's where my sons learned to ski when they were little kids. The main area fans out over a sunny bowl with runs for beginners, intermediates, and advanced skiers. Lots of off-trail terrain, and 75 miles of downhill runs that can be reached with 45 lifts. There's also 27 miles of cross-country trails. The cross-country trails are also used for snowshoeing. Now, if you're just getting into winter sports and you're not ready to learn to ski, snowshoeing is a great activity. Excellent cardiovascular exercise, and it burns hundreds of calories an hour. The ultimate calorie burner in the neighborhood is the GP 24 Hours of Villars, a charity race that got started in 1998. It's a team relay race where each team tries to accumulate as many miles as possible during a 24-hour period. There are two easy downhill runs. The first one is used for the day. The second one is used at night. The team that covers the greatest number of miles wins, and each mile for each team raises money for the charity, with individuals and businesses donating the funds. The Lake Geneva region is also the home of an organization called Handy Concept. It's devoted to increasing the range of sporting and recreational activities available to people with special physical needs. Trained instructors and modified equipment allow people to meet the challenges of sports that had previously been inaccessible. Claude-Alain Hofer worked for the Swiss Association for Paraplegics, taking groups on trips throughout Europe. Eventually, he decided to open a business that created outdoor activities for the people he had been working with.
On the winter time, we have uniski, that's for the paraplegic people or amputated people. We have the dual ski. Dual ski is the same with two ski, and this one we use for quadriplegic. And then we have the fauteuil ski, and this one is pretty for strong handicap people. And so when people just sitting, and I drive on the back. Also on the summertime, mountain bike with 3 wheels, and then biking also with 3 wheels, just with hands.
When I came in Villars, I heard there was a concept here, and so I asked if I can do like everybody else. And when I start, I liked it, and so I continue. And
the most important is to be outside, to be in the mountain, to have fun with the sun.
For me, it's like paradise. It's incredible. It's new freedom.
it feels like a good feeling.
I'm just beginning to learn to ski.
Yes?
Mostly I'm scared.
Don't be scared.
Don't be scared. I'll try not to be, okay? I'll use you as an example. Mm-hmm. Claude-Alain Hofer's work with physically challenged people has begun to change Villars-Grillon's sensibilities. The entire town is becoming more and more open to what nature offers and how to make it available to everyone, and in areas that are quite surprising. This is the restaurant Pepino in the Eurotel. The chef, Joël Quinton, was born in France and came to Villars one winter to cook for the season. 20 years later, and he's still in the kitchen. A while back, he took a course with a local botanist and discovered that there are dozens of edible plants in the woods surrounding Villars. Almost every day he heads out into the forest and returns with a selection of herbs and plants that end up on your plate. Bear in mind, however, that Joël is an expert and knows what's safe to eat and what's not. I definitely wouldn't try this on your own. The meal he prepared for us started with a tomato flan with garlic leaves and baby ivy. The main course was roasted lamb with an alpine thyme cream sauce, baby carrots, and sautéed wild mushrooms. Dessert was geranium ice cream, a small forest, and an herb-flavored cookie. Ice cream was good. Cookie was good. Joel said to me that everything on my plate was edible. Someone take him at his word. Good cop, made of sugar. 2 or 3 times each year, Joël runs a class where guests go into the Alps and learn which plants are tasty and safe to eat. They bring the flowers and the herbs back to the restaurant where they learn to prepare them. You can sit at a table and see Switzerland's natural beauty on a plate, or you can sit on a train and just watch it roll by. As you travel from town to town, it's great to have a Swiss pass. You get them in the United States, and it makes it a lot easier to get around Switzerland on buses, trains, and boats. But you gotta get the train to get the full benefit! While I was in the Lake Geneva area, I stayed in the town of Les Saints. Its history goes back to the year 515 when the Royal Abbey of St. Maurice was founded. The Roman Empire had fallen, and robbers were pillaging the valley. Les Saints was built high up and behind a hill, which kept it hidden. Then for the next 1,200 years, not much happened. From time to time, a priest would come up from the valley to bless the cows who'd become very religious. And that was pretty much it. In 1789, Thomas Malthus, the great British political economist, studied the life expectancy of the people in Les Saints and compared it to the life expectancy of the general population in Europe. He decided that people lived longer here because of the healthful climate and the isolation, and he published that in his famous book. And that was the end of the isolation. Clinics began popping up, and the place became a major international center for people recovering from assorted diseases. Dr. Auguste Grolier came to town and presented his theory that sunshine was the great cure. He believed that everyone should do everything in their underwear, so your body would get as much sunlight as possible. That's a photograph of children sitting in class, in their underwear. When antibiotics took over the curing business, Les Saints turned itself into a winter sports resort, and everyone put their clothing back on. Today it offers ski slopes for intermediates and beginners, skating, curling, ski bobbing, snowboarding, cross-country skiing, and an amazing assortment of underwear shops. In the center of town, there's a restaurant called La Fromagerie, which means the cheese farm. The building was put up in 1687 and was the home of a cheesemaker. Eventually, it became the center for a farmer's co-op. And finally, this restaurant, which specializes in dishes that use cheese as a primary ingredient. The starring dish is a cheese fondue designed for Big Dippers. The children's menu has one for Little Dippers. There's raclette, melted cheese and steamed potatoes. Tome vaudoise, which is a disc of grilled cheese over beet, cabbage, and carrot salad. Rosti au fromage, hashed brown potatoes with melted cheese on top. And there are at least 3 variations on each of the above. In the center of the room is a giant fireplace in which cheese is actually being made. It's made from the milk of local cows and tastes like a Gruyere. They make cheeses that are semi-hard and hard. And the aging room is right behind the bar, where they keep the real hard stuff. When the restaurant opened, the owners decided to turn the upstairs room into a museum and invited people from the area to donate their historic farming tools, cooking equipment, and other antiques. To give you an idea of what life was like on an alpine farm in the early 1800s. The Swiss have a deep respect for their agricultural heritage and often use the most traditional equipment. Pierre Turien is a local coppersmith who builds and repairs the giant cauldrons used to make farmhouse cheeses. He also shapes the bells that hang from the necks of the cows that lead the herd up into the mountain pastures each spring. He's one of the 3 cauldron makers left in Switzerland. And for those of us who don't make cheese in giant cauldrons or own a lead cow, Pierre hand makes copper kitchen utensils. He starts his cauldrons by taking a sheet of copper and flattening the edges, then rolling it into a circle. The ends are fitted together and fastened. The inside edges are sealed and shaped. The bottom edge is rounded into a bowl. The rim is formed and pounded. The bottom is fitted, and a handle is made and attached. And now back to the cowbells. Cowbells to mark the lead cow, cow beanbags, cow dishes, cow potholders. It's all part of Switzerland's bovine bonding. The domestication of animals began about 10,000 years ago with the reindeer and the dog. But it wasn't until hunters and gatherers decided to stay put, growing crops and living in one place, that animals were bred in captivity and put to use. That was about 7,000 years ago. Many people assume that the domestication of cattle took place for economic reasons, as a source of milk and meat. But that was not the only reason. It looks like the first cattle to be domesticated were important because of their symbolic value in the rituals of the moon goddess cults. Keeping large beasts in captivity and then getting them to reproduce in captivity ensured a supply of animals for cultic purposes. The amazing variety of cow art in Switzerland may be more about respecting ancient cultic values than anything else. Bernard Bart lives in Lausanne, and like many of the town's inhabitants, started out in the cheese business. But health problems forced him to change careers. Not wanting to go too far from his beloved cows, he started making wooden cow sculptures. And they've become a major example of the local folk art. They're made from linden wood and take about 15 hours to produce. The primary shape is cut out with an electric saw. The details are carved by hand. And finally, the figure is painted. It looks like people have been living in Lausanne with their cows, both real and sculptured, for at least 1,500 years. But just down the road, in the valley below Lausanne, is an even older settlement, the town of Aigle, where people have been living for over 4,000 years, many in the same rent-controlled apartments. A good example would be the castle at Aigle. The present structure was put up in the 1200s and still exhibits the architectural features that were so popular at the time. 12-foot-thick walls that could repel cannonballs. Conveniently placed bevel slots for shooting arrows at your enemies. A pleasantly situated overhang for pouring boiling oil on unwanted guests. A 100-foot-high tower for those months where you just want to be alone. And like all castles, it has always come with a complete selection of local peasants who were trained to take care of those bothersome household chores. These days, the castle is a museum with a series of displays commemorating Egla's long history as an area for the production of fine wines. The first vineyards were put in place by the ancient Romans. There's an exhibition that illustrates the evolution of wine bottles and explains that it was impossible to conduct business without a uniform system of measurement. If you were buying wine from a distant vineyard and you expected the big bottle, because that's what people used in your neighborhood, and you ended up with a little one, because that's what they used 2 valleys over, you had a problem. In the late 1700s, France introduced the metric system, based on the meter, which is 1/10,000,000th of a quarter of the world's equator. The French clearly understood how much more convenient 1/10,000,000th of a quarter of the equator was than a foot. The people of Vaud, where I am standing, did not want to give up the foot, and so they standardized it at 3/10 of a 10,000,000th part of the equator. They also introduced the hand, which they standardized at 4/100th of a millionth part of the equator. Of course, at the time, people were not totally convinced as to the proper length of the equator, and so often there was a 2.0115 correction one way or the other. Are you getting this down? The unit of measurement for wine became the liter, which is a volume measurement based on the meter. Attempts to understand this system led to an outburst of heavy drinking, which in turn resulted in Egla producing some of the finest wines in Switzerland. They have a light bouquet, a nice balance of fruit and acidity, and the more you drink, the more you think you understand the metric system. The chateau is a charming little restaurant called the Pint of Paradise, where you can have an excellent lunch and test your comprehension of the metric system. It will, however, take more than a bottle of Egla to get me to go paragliding. But I'm beginning to understand why it's attractive to many people and why they come to the Lake Geneva region to learn to paraglide or just take a ride with an instructor. Interesting, but not quite for me. So let me introduce you to Sarah Perlman, my senior producer, who is committed to do this. I made her get a letter from her mother, and she's all set. And this is Andy Cope, who has been my cameraman for years. And he knows a lot about cameras, but nothing about paragliding, and has volunteered to do this. And he has a note from his psychiatrist. Jean-François Blazer is a licensed instructor and will teach you the necessary skills or just give you a ride. And this is Emily Aronson. She's the executive producer and the boss, and we're going for hot chocolate and to write a few postcards to our family. Basically, what you're doing is flying a parachute shaped like a wing. There's no rigid frame, just a series of fabric tubes with openings at the front edge.
Okay, now we start to run.
The wing is launched like a kite. The pilot runs down from the top of a mountain until he reaches a speed of about 12 miles an hour, at which point the wing is inflated and takes off. The pilot is suspended in a harness and controls the wing with a series of ropes connected to the front edge. The sport got started in the mountainous parts of the United States, France, and Switzerland. At first, mountain climbers saw paragliding as just an easy way to get down, but it soon became a sport on its own. Skilled pilots can use rising air currents to carry them over considerable distances. Flights of 100 miles are not uncommon. The world record for straight distance is over 200 miles.
This is great. There's nothing but the sound of wind in your ears. We're 3,000 feet up. It is so great.
One of the most skilled pilots is Marino Frey.
You are free like a bird, you fly, you enjoy flying, you enjoy to see the scenery. It's so nice to fly. You have to do it to understand what is flying.
It's amazing. There they are. See the both of them?
That's winter in the Lake Geneva region of Switzerland. For Travels and Traditions, I'm Burt Wolf. Amazing ride. The microclimate in the town of Châteaudet creates ideal flight conditions and has made it a world center for ballooning. Each year during the last week of January, hot air balloonists from all over the world come to Châteaudet. Over 80 balloons from 15 different countries take part in a week of mountain ballooning, and 60,000 spectators come to watch. Hot air ballooning was introduced during the late 1700s by the Montgolfier brothers, who were responsible for the first flight with passengers. You couldn't actually call it a manned flight because the passengers were a rooster, a lamb, and a duck. I should say in all fairness that a year later, in 1783, they were responsible for the first flight. There is no propulsion system. A hot air balloon can't be steered. The pilot can control the height by dropping the weights attached to the balloon. He can add more hot air to increase the balloon's height, or let some of the air out, which will lower it. The direction of travel is controlled by locating and catching air currents heading in the direction you want to go. The longest balloon flight, both in terms of distance, 25,361 miles, and time, 20 days straight, began right here in Châteaudet. It's still the world record, and it's held by a local Swiss psychiatrist named Bertrand Piccard, and his British co-pilot and balloon designer, Geneva, is known as the Canton of Vaud. The general area is known as the Lake Geneva region, and it offers some of the best locations in Europe for a winter vacation. During the late 60s, I lived in this part of Switzerland and spent my vacations right here. The area has all the winter sports you'd expect and comfortable accommodations. What makes it special is that unlike many of Europe's winter resorts that are designed for the rich and famous, most of the towns in Vaud are set up for families or couples who are considering becoming families. Ah, the thrill of true love. Like a balloon, it lifts you to new heights. And the Lake Geneva region is a perfect spot for balloonists or people who just want to take an amazing flight that was manned. It was over Paris, it lasted 28 minutes, and there was a pilot and a passenger. Hot air balloons depend on the lifting power of hot air, which is lighter than cold air. Accordingly, ballooning in the cool winter air of the Swiss Alps has a particular advantage. Xavier Fiel is a licensed balloon pilot who takes part in the great balloon events, but he'll also take visitors up for a ride.
For the hot air balloon, when you burn inside the balloon, the hot air, it
expands.
Exactly, so like this you can fly. Only control I have, up, down. That's it. The speed and the direction I can't control. It's all the time the wind.
Switzerland is divided into states called cantons. The canton that runs across the northern and eastern shores of Lake